Hello, dear audience. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in Chile. It's my first trip to Chile, actually first trip to South America. And I would like to extend my gratitude and thanks to the organizers of this incredible event. What sort of 4 days have we had? And what sort of incredible things have we heard? It's late in the conference, and I'll try to keep you awake. And here I'm going to tell you about the way we're going to liberate the protein production on the planet. I come from a company that's called Solar Foods. We are a spin-off from a national research laboratory, and we've been operating now for 5 years, and we will potentially transform a good part of the food system in the world. The thing that we do is that we make food out of thin air with feedstocks that have no connection to traditional agriculture. What does it mean? Okay. There is a bioprocess that many of you are quite familiar with, which is brewing beer. You brew beer using yeast, and that yeast requires sugar as its energy and carbon source. So when you need sugar, then you have a sugarcane farm somewhere, and you have a connection to agriculture. But in our case, we produce protein by a technique that's called microbial gas fermentation, where our main feedstocks are two gases, CO2 and hydrogen. In addition, we do feed these bacteria a growth medium that's basically water with some inorganic salts, and all this mix is then put into a gas bioreactor, and this little guy starts fulfilling its purpose in life, which is to multiply. I should say that the microbe that we use is something that we discovered from the Finnish countryside, so it's a naturally occurring bacterium, which is called a hydrogen oxidizing bacteria. It loves the conditions in the bioreactor and it starts multiplying, and then we start harvesting biomass out of the bioreactor while feeding new growth media at the same volumetric rate. The water is then separated and put back into the bioprocess, so the net water use is very, very small, and out comes this sort of a yellow powder that we call solein. Now, solein is primarily protein. It's up to 70% protein, and it has some dietary fibers, some folates, and some fats. But many of you also understand that the value of protein, not all proteins are created equal. So the value of a protein is really determined by its amino acid composition. And as it turns out, we've done lots of analytics on this protein. As it turns out, the amino acid composition of solein is very close to that of dried beef. So it's amazing. We actually get this almost like beef-like protein with gases. In comparison to many of the other, let's say, plant-based proteins, solein fares very well from a nutritional standpoint, and it fulfills, basically puts a dot on many of these boxes here. But the most important thing that we're doing here is trying to reduce the footprint of food production. From a purely greenhouse gas emission standpoint, solein production produces 500 times less CO2 than animals. We produce several tens of times less greenhouse gas emissions than plants. From a standpoint of freshwater withdrawals, it's also 1/300 of that of animals, and a lot smaller than plants. And then the land use is also very small. And the reason for that is because we do not have that agricultural connection. The land use is basically the size of the factory and maybe the solar panel farm that feeds it the electricity that we need. One reason why I wanted to come to Chile is that if you look at the world and the food production, we have on our website actually this world food map. In this picture, we have the food production intensity across the world as it is currently. But we have also, together with our academic partners, come up with what we call a new world food map. And if we look at South America and Chile, the new world food map, which has to do with actually the availability of green electricity and the price of it. And guess what? Chile shines bright yellow. It's the best place on the planet to valorize greenhouse gases and hydrogen using green electricity. Our idea is not to feed people the powder. I mean, you can eat it. I've eaten it. But we actually have a food team at Solar Foods who are developing applications on how to apply Solein in recipes to replace egg, replace milk, and then also make fake meat. So in this case, you see a salad. It's not chicken, but it's actually a fake sort of a meat imitant that we have produced with some extrusion from Solein. We have made ice cream. You can actually buy this ice cream in Singapore. Works really well. There's no milk or animal proteins here at all. We have made pasta and noodles. Whoops, it's not moving on. So pasta and noodles, so it gives this good techno-functional properties, as we tell. And we have many, many other foodstuffs that our food team has prepared. These are all pictures from our food laboratory, basically. So anything from meats to ice cream. And why we can address this wide recipe space is because the taste of Solein is like a mild taste of umami. So it doesn't really taste very much of anything by itself. Umami is the taste of protein, basically. One key thing for a company like us, this protein is considered a novel food in most places on the planet, and it requires regulatory approval. We have to prove its nutritional value, we have to prove it's safe for human consumption, and we have now received our first novel food approval by the government of Singapore. We will get the US approval, US FDA by the end of this year, and then the European Union will follow in the next year. We launched, together with this Singapore approval with a partner restaurant, we launched an event where we served various dishes where all the animal proteins were basically replaced by Solein. We are not going to be selling this directly to the consumer. We will work with partners, and the first partnership that we've now announced is with a very large Japanese food manufacturer, Ajinomoto. And actually, of today, we are launching a protein bar with a Finnish large food manufacturer, Fazer. I want to say a few words about our research. We invest heavily in research. We are constantly looking for new organisms for additional properties, but in addition to that, we are moving into synthetic biology. We recently started a large European Innovation Council funded program called HydroCow, where we will actually modify this naturally occurring bacteria's DNA so that it can secrete. In other words, it can produce protein itself. And we have chosen milk protein, beta-lactoglobulin, as our target first molecule. We have 3 partners. We have the University of Aachen, Technical University of Aachen in Germany, University of Groningen in Netherlands, and then a Swiss biotech company called FGen. And this is truly quite interesting because if we can get this microbe that eats hydrogen and CO2 to produce milk protein, there's probably we can do other food proteins and maybe even materials like silk, and then also maybe medicines. We have received a substantial amount of public funding from the European Union. We are the recipient of the largest food grant ever from the European Union, 110 million euro grant notification, of which the 34 first tranche funding is going into ramping up our first factory. You see this sneak peek video, which is actually filmed in that facility. And this factory will be online by the end of this first half of this year, producing 100 tons of Solein per year. The next factory will be another factor of 100, and it will be producing 10,000 tons. Chile could be a really nice place for it because of the cheap electricity here. And when we go to that scale, that industrial scale, our projections show that the price for consumers will be comparable to that of soy protein and other contemporary vegetable proteins, or plant-based proteins. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit, because this is the way we're going to transform the food system here on Earth. But we also are going to do this in space. We have been competing in a NASA Deep Space Food Challenge since 2021. And the space agency likes this approach a lot for 2 reasons. It produces food in space, and it uses waste that is available on a spacecraft. What is that waste? CO2 and hydrogen. And I'll kind of walk you through it, what that means. In the contest, we have designed a kind of a conceptual design of a spacefaring bioreactor. It's a much smaller system because obviously it only needs to feed like 6 people, so 50 liters or something like that. But kind of the key promise, if we do this in space, is not actually just the food production, but it's the water savings. So in any space habitat nowadays, you have on board the spacecraft, you have an ECLSS, Environmental Control and Life Support System, with only one purpose: keep the crew alive. And how it does it, it provides them with the oxygen by electrolyzing water into oxygen for the crew and hydrogen. And it also removes the CO2 from the cabin atmosphere. But however, even though the water that the crew uses for drinking, food rehydration and washing, 90% of that is recycled. But the water that goes into producing oxygen, let's say I take 1 liter of oxygen, water and I split it to oxygen and hydrogen, currently the hydrogen goes out of the window. It goes to space. Then that means that that 1 liter of water is lost forever. And for this reason, the ISS loses about 1,200 kilograms of water per year. Now, 1,200 liters doesn't sound like a lot, but it's really expensive to launch that into space. So what our solution is for this is that we actually plug in the bioreactor and this protein production system as part of the environmental control and life support system, where the bacteria eat all of that excess hydrogen that would have been going out of the window, and it actually eats all the CO2 that otherwise would have gone also out of the window. And voila, there is water produced as a side product because there's hydrogen and oxygen in the bioreactor. There's protein coming out. So you got 2 things coming out. You got water and protein. And we save that 1,200 kilos per year for a space station. I'm just going to skip this. What it means in terms of savings, using current launch costs to low Earth orbit with SpaceX Falcon 9 and Crew or Cargo Dragon, which is about $50,000 per kilogram. That 1,200 liters transforms to more than $40 million per year. And that's just with a small space station. Next year onwards, there will be private space habitats that will be populating the low Earth orbit, because the International Space Station is coming to the end of its life. The next space stations will not be public property, they will be private. And agency astronauts from NASA, JAXA, elsewhere are going to be the prime tenants. So these companies that will build these next generation of commercial space habitats are, of course, very interested because we could save them a lot of money. We are, of course, also planning to go further. The Artemis program is planning to set a permanent human presence on the moon. While there is water in the regolith of the moon, mining that regolith for water is going to be still quite expensive. And if you can do this in a truly circular way, as we propose, you will save money and it will be less dangerous. Okay, I'll just conclude by also saying, maybe you might answer, why do you do the space things? This space challenge is an ultimate challenge of a fully circular economy. And I think we here on the ground would also be served well if we actually learned something about these things, how we do them in space, if we could turn our cities, like the previous speaker also mentioned, to this circularity, where everything goes through the loops multiple times. And then we can save the best spaceship that we've ever seen, which is planet Earth. Thank you very much.